Hey there, everybody. Brett from Love Bats and the Belfry back for another episode of A Journey Through the Twilight Zone. I did cover this very briefly in my top 10 Twilight Zone episodes, and it is one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. I wanted to talk about the episode Walking Distance, Season 1, Episode 5. This is, by far, probably one of the more different episodes of the Twilight Zone. Even though this was towards the beginning of the series, this is one that definitely has a bit of sentimentality to it. It isn't more based on fear. A little bit of scary aspects to it, but it's very, very minor. It's about Martin Sloan. He's like this kind of executive vice president of media in New York City, and he basically drives out and stops at this gas station and just to get filled up, and then finds out that he's right near his hometown that he grew up in, called Homewood. And he asks the gas station attendant, he asks for an oil change and such, and he tells him it'll be about an hour, and he's like, okay, no problem. And so he ends up going into Homewood because it's walking distance from the gas station. And this is a fun play on the whole "you can't go home again." And Martin Sloan finds himself his hometown as he did when he was a kid. And as he goes through and walking through the neighborhood and such, he talks to a little kid and he's like, I used to live there. And he points to his old house, and then the kid's like, oh, the Sloan house. He's like, you still call it that? Finds out. He goes in and then finds his mom and dad, living in the house still. His parents are a little weirded out for good reason, because he's just being like, I'm your son and such. And the person next door to, the house he grew up in is like saying like all this stuff about this new car, even though it's like 25 years old, saying like he hasn't seen a rumble seat in quite a while. And he's just like, this is as fresh as they come. And he's just like, this is so weird. He ends up going to like the park and, talking about hearing band concerts and the merry-go-round and being a kid in the summertime and, how special that is. And he ends up finding the kid version of himself, carving his name into like this post. Like, that's what I looked like, as a kid. So he finds the kid version of himself, and the kid version of himself says something to him, thinking like it's just an adult. And thinking like he's blaming him for something. He's like, you're Martin Sloan, of course you are. And the way that Martin is talking to the kid version of himself is a little off-putting. So, of course, the kid's a little freaked out. So he runs off. This is kind of weird for everyone involved, especially Martin Sloan, as, being a 36-year-old and seeing, like, his hometown hasn't changed. But he slowly starts to realize that it's like, oh, I literally, like, went back in time to, my home as a kid. And the way that things play out, I really, really liked. And especially, he tries to go back to his parents and convince them that he's Martin, like, from the future, basically. And his mom ends up slapping him, and it's just like, it's like no matter what he says, it's like they're not going to believe him. Like, would you believe somebody that knocked on your door and said, I'm your son from the future, type thing? He drops like his wallet. He tries to show his mom like his wallet with his ID and everything, and like she's just not having any of it. And so he ends up just leaving, and then he goes to try to find Martin to try to just talk to him. And he's on the merry-go-round. It's kind of like running from, his future self. And, future Martin's chasing past Martin, and Martin ends up falling off the merry-go-round and injuring his leg. And, of course, so when that happens, it's like what happens in your past affects your future. Martin ends up getting, like, this horrible pain in his leg, too, after, the kid Martin ends up injuring his leg. And so tells him, he's like, after this whole fiasco happens, he tells him, he's like, this is just a wonderful time. Just don't let it pass you by without enjoying it. And, it's hard being a kid and kind of understanding that. It's like, it's just the classic, you don't know what you had till it's gone. And a lot of this episode plays with that, with, nostalgia. And nostalgia is a hell of a drug. I mean, nostalgia can be a good thing. I think it's, for me, I mean, I was born in, 91, so it's like this episode is way back for me. But nostalgia can be a good thing because I have appreciation for old stuff. It's a nice snapshot in time, but no matter what, it's like time is going to move and keep moving forward. So it's good to remember our past, but need to live in the present and almost, look forward to the future as well. So I think there's important aspects of all three, but to those who just kind of love to live in the past and be like, oh, life was just so much better back then, as true as you want to believe that, and it possibly could be true. I mean, the 2020s is like, as I get older, I'm like, man, things did seem a lot easier and a lot better and such. So that's why, like, nostalgia, I mean, in a way, it can kind of give us hope for, like, cool things to come and, things to look forward to in the future. It kind of gives us that hope of, like, that feeling of, feeling great as a kid and always enjoying things, like, in the moment. And then once it, we grow up, it's like we kind of just are looking back at our childhood a lot. And it's like, it's good to do that. But yeah, it's like you can't just live in that. This episode does a great job at that, because just at the end, Martin is just kind of like sitting like really bummed out and like really sad and, like next to the merry-go-round, and his dad ends up coming to him and saying, I looked in your wallet and apparently you are Martin Sloan. You have bills in your wallet that are, haven't happened yet. Your, license expires 25 years from now. The dad kind of believes him. The dad is pretty wise for kind of like going with it and having an open mind about it. And so he just says to Martin, he's like, clearly, like, you don't belong here. You shouldn't be here. And you need to go back to where you were. You might have thought that looking, behind you and the summer as a child, this Martin's time, and you had your time. You've been looking behind you, and try looking ahead and look forward to things. Or a year from, there are going to be moments of merry-go-rounds, feeling of being a child in the summertime, band concerts and such. They bring up band concerts a good amount of times in this episode, but there is no band concert. So my guess was maybe that just didn't make the final cut or something. Yeah, they mentioned band concerts a number of times. I want to say 3-4 times through this episode, but you don't see any sort of like band concert or like big band music type stuff. There's going to be moments in your time that, you're going to have that feeling of being a kid again. Find that happiness of where you're at this point in life. That's probably the best message to take away from this episode, even for it being like, I want to say 70 plus years old of an episode. Still, it rings true to this day, and a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, of course, do have that, effect of, and have a great message that can be applied to today. Martin Sloan, in the beginning of the episode and the end of the episode, he goes into the same, like, convenience store or, like, where they sell ice cream soda. In the beginning of the episode, he asks for ice cream soda with 3 scoops, and it only costs a dime. That's the start of him being like, that's odd that it's still only that amount. And then he goes in later at the end of the episode, and then it's a different guy behind the counter, asks for a chocolate ice cream soda with 3 scoops, and the guy's like, 3 scoops? Sure, I can make it with 3 scoops. And he's like, but it'll cost extra. And then he asks about the guy who used to own the place, and the guy behind the counter is like, oh yeah, he died like 15-20 years ago. And then Martin mentions the merry-go-round, and he's like, oh yeah, they tore that down like 25 years ago or something like that. How relatable that is, where it's like you remember something and expecting, like, if you went back to just revisit even just a location, like how much it changes. That's how I think of, like, where I grew up. It's like now, like, I don't go there super often, but whenever I do, I'm like, oh my gosh, this place has changed so much. So it's so relatable in that regard. I got to go home again in this weird circumstance, but it's time to get back to, my actual life, live in the present, and, look forward to the future. So that's definitely something that, we all could remember as well. I mean, as much as love our childhoods, it's a really big gray area with nostalgia, honestly, and I feel like I'm having a hard time kind of wrapping my head around it. But at the end of the day, yeah, we kind of just need to appreciate what we have now, look forward to things to come in the future, because, you don't know what life entails. I will wrap it up there. Sorry if I went on a very long tangent about nostalgia and the past and stuff like that, but I love this episode for that aspect. Still one of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone. And I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about this episode. A lot to take in with this episode for it only being 22 minutes. It really makes your imagination run wild when you're thinking about, like, you know, your own childhood and things that you grew up with and things that really hold that special place in your heart. I hope you all have enjoyed. I appreciate you tuning in to Love Bets in the Belfry. I will see you in a future video. Bye.